He is the great grandson of Mahatma Gandhi and also an author and an activist. He will be speaking on opportunities of reviving solidarity in times of a pandemic. We will be joined very soon by him, and the lecture will be for about 45 minutes. He will talk for 45 minutes, and then we will have questions and answers for about half an hour. So we hopefully will be finishing by 12:15. So as more people are joining in, we will start just in a bit. So hold on tight and we'll come back to you. Yes, we are all set. Welcome, Mr. Tushar Gandhi. We have participants joined in. So over to you. We can have the lecture to talk for about 45 minutes and then half an hour for questions and answers. I hope that's okay for you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining in on a Sunday morning. Let me start the talk with good wishes to all of you, and hope all of you are safe and secure in these times of a pandemic. Hope there are no bad memories to carry along. Please be secure, please be safe, and please be positive also, because in these times of a global pandemic where our way of life seems to be under threat, the only thing that can help us survive and sustain is being positive about it, having a positive attitude. And so the topic that Behzad requested me to speak on gives one a kind of hope that we are not alone. Although we are isolated, we are not alone, and everybody shares the concerns. Because as I was, when I was growing up, I was always told that it didn't matter if we could not participate in the joyous occasions of people, could not wish them when they were happy, but it was a beholden duty to show sympathies and be in solidarity with people when they had grief, when they were intimidated, or when they were under duress. Because that is the time when people require support, require not to feel alone and isolated. And I think that is a lesson that we all must learn in these times of adversity, where in recent times, for the first time, I think all of us, all over the world, are faced with the similar kind of concerns and anxieties and a feeling of being under threat. Because, we don't know what is going to happen in the future, how things are going to be, how life is going to survive in under these conditions, even after we conquer this pandemic. And that we are going to conquer the pandemic, there is no question or doubt about it, because humanity has survived much graver threats, much graver situations which were man-made. And we've always overcome man-made calamities as well as calamities that nature has inflicted upon us. And so I'm very sure that we are going to conquer this. What must be of concern is how are we going to live and be after this? Are we still going to be universal brotherhood? Are we still going to be united? Are we still going to think of ourselves as one world, one humanity? Or is this forced isolation and insulation going to become a way of life? Are we going to be, as human beings, insulated from one another? Are we going to shut out all the other people from our lives and from our way of life living, and get into a kind of a cocoon to ensure our safety, because that is the great danger that we are faced by, because this situation almost justifies our being isolated or being individuals. And I think that is something that we must all be very concerned about. And that is where solidarity in these times of adversities becomes very, very important. We have to combine, we have to unite, we have to think of ourselves as one humanity. Otherwise, we are going to get back into the thought process of us and them, and then them are going to be all the unwanted people. And so it's very important that we show solidarity with each other. This is an opportunity where there is a human crisis, there's a worldwide crisis, and which can be used to unite us. I'd like to go back in history and give examples of how great people in history have used adversities and calamities to build bonds of friendship and achieve objectives of uniting people. And to start closer to home, I would like to talk about how Gandhi, my great grandfather, utilized political and social crises in his time to unite people and bring them together. Right from the time he was working in South Africa, there were many instances where there were epidemics that hit the communities in South Africa, and as usual, racism affected the communities and the relief work in those communities also. And Bapu was the only one who realized that this was an opportunity where people could be united, and the thought or the concept of universal brotherhood could be shown in example. And in two instances of the plague in South Africa, he started a relief organization and started working in the community to bring relief to people, and achieved that by working for everybody. Although it was an Indian volunteers organization, they did not differentiate or they did not restrict themselves to bringing relief and succor to the Indian community only. They worked for everybody who was afflicted by the plague. And by the end of the epidemic, when the epidemic was brought under control, he had earned the respect of the communities against whom he was fighting for equal rights. The colonials themselves started appreciating him. The second instance was during the Anglo-Boer Wars, when the British colonialists and the Boers, the Dutch South African colonialists, were fighting over supremacy in the southern African colonies, and they were at war with one another. And Bapu started Indian Ambulance Corps to bring relief and first aid to the wounded soldiers. And he and his corps of volunteers, they interceded in the war front. They were right in the middle of the battlefield, working to bring relief to wounded soldiers. And a description of that time suggests that they were active during actual active war, not during time of ceasefires and truces, but actually when war was happening, when bombs and shells were being exploded, when bullets were being fired. They were in the battlefront, in between the two armies fighting against each other, braving the bullets and bombs, and providing first aid and transportation to the wounded to the military hospitals. And they decided that they were not going to work as British unit or Dutch unit, but they would work as humanitarian aid, and they gave aid to any wounded that they found. Many a times it so happened that they carried the Dutch wounded to the British field hospitals, and the doctors would tell them, why have you brought the enemy to us? And Bapu would tell them that your doctors, there are no enemies for you. They're just wounded people over there. Word got out on the battlefield that these people are precious. They must not be harmed because they give aid to anybody who requires that aid. And throughout the war, they did not have casualties because as soon as they entered the theater of war, both the armies fighting with each other realized that these are the guys who have to be protected and would ensure that there was no firing towards this community. At the end of the war, Bapu had won allies amongst the British and amongst the Dutch who sympathized with his cause. And that is where what helped him to bring about a semblance of equal rights. He did not win the war for equal rights, that happened much later in South Africa. But he started that process of equality and justice for all in South Africa. And these were the measures that he utilized in adversity and adverse situations to enforce, to bring about that kind of change in the society, in his adversaries, whom he considered to be adversaries. The greatest example back in India was when he came back to India in 1915 and slowly got involved in the freedom movement and the political situation in India. He realized that the gravest weakness of the Indian movement for freedom was the disunity of the people, where the people were not united. And so he started exploring possibilities of how to unite his people, how to bring about a unity between the two major communities in India, the Hindus and the Muslims. And he hit upon the situation where the Khilafat, the Caliphate, had been abolished by the British, and the system of the Caliph had been removed, replaced by governance by the British. And he realized that the Caliph was not just a political leader of the Islamic world, but he was also a spiritual leader, the keeper of Mecca and Medina. And so he decided that, supporting a movement for the restoration of the caliphate would be something that the Muslims would appreciate also. And he launched the movement. He declared his support to the caliphate movement in India. And although India had nothing to do with the reinstatement of the caliph or not, the Indian Muslims realized that there were people who thought sympathetically about their own cause without that cause having any effect on the other community, and they appreciated that fact. And for the next almost 15 years, there was very admirable instances of Hindu-Muslim unity, which finally uh, brought about the defeat of the British and the realization of the British that they could not rule India any longer. And these are the kind of strategic instances of people uniting. Even if you look at the American civil rights movement, although it was a movement of the people of the African American origins, they involved the whites against whom they were fighting for to replace the racial prejudices and things. You will see amongst the leadership also, and amongst those who were the grassroots workers in the agitations of the African American community in the civil rights movement, you will see that there were instances where it was a minuscule minority, but yet there was a minority of whites who were fighting shoulder to shoulder for equality for the African American community in the US. And that came about because they were reached out to. They were explained how their sympathies were important to the cause and why the cause was justified and right. It doesn't happen only because you are a good speaker. It happens because you are able to project that sincerity to the people and to be able to convince them that in your time of need also we will stand up for you. We will. This is not just a one-way traffic. the sympathy and the solidarity are a two-way street. And so these are the kind of situations that we should be emulating in these times, when more and more there is a message going around of isolating ourselves, being away from others, being self-contained, being becoming islands, like the famous Simon and Garfunkel song, "I am a rock, I am an island." We are not an individual rock. We are not an individual isolated island. We are humanity, and we are connected with each other. And these are the times when we have to reassure one another about the importance of the bonding of our sympathies and our allegiances with each other. We have to find the adversities faced by other communities and come together and talk with each other, stand in solidarity, hold hands, and assure each other that we are there for you, even if there is social isolation. And I know that at this point of time, there has to be social isolation, and that's why we are also meeting virtually and not in reality. But the message has to go out that in your time of adversity, I am there for you. And therefore, we are also saying the same thing, that when I need you, please be there for me. This is the kind of bonding that if we ensure at this point of time, it will create a bond which will be permanent and survive the good times also. So we have to start thinking about this. While we work for solutions, or we work for preventive measures that are confined to our own selves and our immediate communities, we have to think about the global community, because post corona world, we don't know what kind of a situation we are going to arise over here. In my own country, in India, we are seeing how the corona situation is being used politically to promote isolationism and intolerance amongst communities. And it is a far more dangerous situation than the corona pandemic poses to humanity and its survival. We are creating a rift in our society that will not be bridged or healed post the corona world. Coronas will come and coronas will go. We have had influenza epidemics right from the early 1900s, and we have survived. Humanity has survived that. We are not going to perish with corona. But the communal virus that is becoming an epidemic in all communities around the world, the racial virus, the communal virus, the virus of not tolerating the other, is far more dangerous, and there is no cure for it. The only cure for it is self cure and joining with each other, coming together, and giving a message that we don't stand isolated, we don't shut anybody out, we are all together in this, and we will conquer this together. Unless we do that, it's going to be extremely difficult. I don't know, many a times I sit back and try to visualize the kind of world that we will have post this corona thing, the kind of society we will have when I don't know if I'll be lynched if I sneeze in public, whether I'll be scorned because I cough in public. And these kind of new prejudices and new intolerances will come into existence in our society. And this can only be cured if we start thinking of the others compassionately and with sympathy, and with the realization that we are all together, we are all one. Humanity has to survive this tragedy. Individuals will definitely survive, but humanity needs to survive this tragedy. And if we don't do that, then I don't know how we are going to be able to survive the epidemic. And so, adversities are the times when we have to learn to bond, to build bridges, to come together with each other. And history has taught us this right from the beginning. We have to learn from historical precedences that Humankind has only survived adversities when they have united, they've forged bonds of alliances, they've forged bonds of humanity, just not friendship. You know, we have friends, friends will support us, but we have to build bonds with those we don't even know are friends, those who we have to think sympathetically about people who are strangers to us, because this adversity affects not just us, but the entire living humankind. And we don't know what it is going to do, what kind of havoc it's going to play with us. And so we have to be very sure about it. Have you lost my video? Okay, I'm back. And we have to survive this. The only way we will be able to survive is how we started civilization in the first place. How did we become from the individual hunter gatherer to communities, to civilizations, to societies, to nations? You know, we progressed in that manner. And that was because as a social animal, we started building bridges, we started building alliances, and we started coming together, like-minded people, people living in a region, people living in a family, people connected by blood, people not connected by blood. Now we are connected by technology, and we should be using that technology to build bridges with each other, to share our joys and our grief, to request sympathy and solidarity in our times of adversities. And that can be so easily done. Today, I communicate with so many in humanity using technology. It's so much more easy for us to connect today and be together than it used to be before in former times. And yet, in those times, we see how alliances were formed, how people came together, how united we fought against the adversities of this time. There is no reason why we cannot do the same thing in this time of technology. But technology also is very susceptible to abuse. And today we see, at least in my country, we see how technology is being used to spread hate more than friendship and tolerance and understanding. And so there are dangers of that also. And we must be aware of all these things. And that's where it is very essential that we understand what the situation calls for and what will be the solution to this situation. We must start preparing for the post corona world. We must start preparing for post corona humanity right now. We can't say that we'll wait till we are over this adversity and then we will start thinking of how to survive and how to live after this adversity has been conquered. No, we have to start working right now. We have to form alliances, we have to build bridges, and that will only happen if we sympathetically come together with people. We sympathetically think of others situations more than we think of ourselves, because we are more than capable of taking care of ourselves. What makes us apart is our concern for others, for the well-being of the others, for the happiness of the others, for the prosperity of others. And that is where we have to look for causes to form solidarities. It just doesn't have to be corona linked. Corona can become the catalyst for us to form friendships, for us to form alliances. And we must do that because human beings are a species which is engineered to be compassionate. I'm not saying that animal kind is not compassionate, but humankind has a greater degree of compassion and it has a greater degree of cruelty also. We have to decide what is going to be dominant in our lives. We have to understand that what is going to be more important for us, being compassionate or being inconsiderate or intolerant or inhuman. And that is why it's called inhuman, because it is an anti-human uh, belief. Otherwise, there would have been another word for it. Inhuman is when you stop being a human being. And so that means that a human being is compassionate by nature. We cannot be uncompassionate. We cannot feel sympathy for somebody else's grief or adversity or ailment. And that is where we show these kind of tendencies. That is where some of us go out of our way to work. Some of us even put ourselves in jeopardy to provide succor to people in adversity. So let us find those common issues. Let us find causes which will help us build those bonds of friendship that will survive this present crisis. We have done that before. We have done it in situations of man-made disasters. We have done it in situations of adversities that were caused by human beings, wars, epidemics, famines, and internal strife. We have stood through thick and thin before. There is no reason why we cannot do it even now. And that is what gives us hope in this kind of a situation where there is no hope. It feels hopeless. Every day we hear about a new outbreak. There's a glimmer of hope, and then there is darkness again. In the morning, you get feel good messages. By the evening, you start getting messages saying that the situation is much grimmer. What will bring us hope? Compassion will bring us hope. If we start thinking of ourselves collectively as a universal global family, that will give us hope, because then that will give us strength, and we will also assure ourselves that in case somebody else finds a cure for this ailment, or finds relief in this pandemic, that person will share it with us. If we look at everybody with doubt, we will never be able to help one another. And this has been proven in history. It is not something that we have to start anew. It is not something that we are being told to do, which is against our given nature. This is something that human society has lived with and learned to use and utilize. And that is where again and again we must bring out this message that the solidarity and compassion has to go across situations, not just calamities, not just adversities, but in situations where there are political threats, in situations where there are societal threats, in situations where there are individual threats, we must stand with one another. There has to be a thread of sympathy that runs through our relationships with everybody. We have become a very selfish society, and in our relationships also, we look for our benefit in a relationship before we even think of a relationship. We have to get out of that habit. We have to start having relationships where there is no take. We give. We are there because somebody else requires us to be there. It doesn't matter if that somebody is going to enrich us or not. And that is where you see that when these kind of calamities happen, the goodness of human beings is reflected. You look at my city, you will find thousands of people who were never ever bothered about anybody else going out into the streets, giving out food, giving out water, just being there for people who are homeless and showing their compassion. And I am reminded of a story that I love to share with everybody. I'm sure that in this world of internet, you have also heard it. But I think it's very important to narrate that story again over here. It's about thousands of starfish that were stranded on a beach. And in the early morning, a man who was out on the beach walking sees another man picking up two starfish at a time and going and dropping them off into the water. And the man who is watching this realizes that soon it's going to be sunrise, and then the sun is going to become unbearably hot, and all these starfish will die because they're stranded outside of the water. And after watching that man for a few minutes, seeing him pick up two starfish at a time and putting them back in the water, he can't help himself, and asks that man, he says, "Sir, what are you doing?" And the man says, "I'm saving the starfish." And he says, "Look around you. There are thousands of starfish stranded on this beach, and very soon they're going to start dying. You're not going to be able to save any of them, you know. So he said, but yes, I'll save these two. And he says, what difference does it make saving the two? And just then that man is putting two more starfish into the water and he says it will make a difference to these two. And that is important for us. And this is the power of doing good. You may not make a difference to humanity, but when you make a difference to that individual will remember that compassionate gesture for the rest of their life. And when their time comes to show that kind of solidarity and sympathy, they will be reminded of the sympathy and solidarity they were shown in their time of need and requirement. And that is what should drive us. That is the feeling that should become important for us. We should think, start thinking of the individual. Many of us want to do good work, but we don't do that good work because we are like the other person observing the situation and saying, it's such a grim and huge, humongous situation. What difference that can I make? It's not going to change the situation, it's not going to improve it. Start thinking of the difference you will make to the individual, to the microcosm, to the small proportion of people, and believe that your good gesture will become an example. Because as my great grandfather used to say, an ounce of practice has much more effect than a ton of preaching. And so let's start practicing in these kind of ways, in making a difference to one person, in making a difference to a small section of society. And we will build a good world, a better world, working that way in our lifetime. We will make a difference. We will become the change agents. Opportunities like this come once in a lifetime. This kind of a pandemic has never happened in my lifetime. We've had other outbreaks of epidemics. We've had Ebola. It was confined to a part of Africa and wasn't allowed to go out. But this kind of a pandemic has never happened in our situation. Let's turn it to our advantage. Let's make it something that we can use to create a better world. Let us be proactive. Let us be positive in our method of dealing with this situation. Every opportunity is an opportunity because it gives us an advantage to do something. It gives us an occasion to exploit it. How we exploit it is up to us. Do we do it for selfish profitability or we do it for the betterment of humankind, for the betterment of others? Makes the difference. And so let us start thinking of compassion. Let us start thinking of a post-corona world where we still have to live. We still have to live with each other. We have to be together. We have to stand together. We have to be prepared to face the next challenge that is posed to us. And challenges will keep happening. We will next year maybe there will be something else that grabs our attention and challenges us. There may be a man-made disaster waiting to happen because we have enough of those kind of lunatics wanting to threaten the world in their own megalomaniac designs. We have to stand up to them also. We have to be prepared for that also. And so this is the time when we must start thinking of creating alliances, forge an alliance of humanity, an alliance of compassion, an alliance of selfless relationship. We've been talking about selfless service, where we do something without expecting anything else. We now have to have selfless relationships, where we have relationships because we require each other, not because we're going to gain something from the other or for our selfish sakes, just because we are lonely and we need company, we make a friendship. No, let's make friendships because the institution of friendship is important, not the benefits of that friendship. The benefits will accrue. We are never going to be without those kind of benefits, but you have to we have to start thinking of these situations and I don't know, something went wrong on my computer. I'm not seeing anybody else now. But in conclusion, I would like to say that Corona is a crisis, but it is also an opportunity. It is an opportunity to bring out the goodness of our souls, of our compassion, of our humanity, our humanness. Let's exploit that. Let us put, uh,
We
I
can
don't know,
hear you, Mr.
can you hear
Gandhi,
me?
and
Can
yes,
you
yes,
hear
we
me?
can, and we can
Okay.
also see you. Yes,
Okay,
yeah,
now I think I'm back. I'm sorry for that
yes,
glitch. In conclusion, I would like to say that let's use this pandemic as an opportunity, and not just a medical opportunity, not something that we stand together because it is a life threatening crisis. Let us treat it as a starting point to create a more compassionate, more caring, and more together humanity, a human way of life, way of life which will be better than the pre-corona situations that we were in. I am concerned about my own country, but I am more concerned about the world as it's going to be post corona. What are the challenges that it is going to throw out to us? How is it going to be encouraging the existing prejudices in humanity? How are we going to deal with the existing phobias and the addition of the phobias that are going to come with the post corona situation? Our prejudices are going to increase. We are going to become more intolerant. Are we going to become that way? That is the question we should be all asking each other. Is this situation given to us to make ourselves better, or is this situation forced on us so that we change for the worst? That is what which will make us conquer this situation or succumb to it. So let's think about that. Let's go with a positive attitude to life. Let us save the starfish two at the time without bothering about how it is going to happen with the rest of the starfish. Somebody else might be inspired by our kind gesture and they will help save some more, a few more. Just the other day, I was looking at a video where there is this organization that is saving olive ridley turtles. And in this time of social isolation, they were still saving olive ridley hatchlings and helping them get back into the sea, avoiding the fishermen's nets. Let us be like that. Let our compassion transcend our species. Let our compassion transcend the communities that we are in, the families that we are living, and go beyond that. Let us start actually thinking about what the Hindu philosophy has always been talking about, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which is brotherhood of the universal humankind. We are all brothers, we are all family of human beings. The differences that we have created are man made. Let us obliterate those differences and come together and become one once again. That is what a crisis should be utilized for, to dump what was bad amongst us. Unfortunately, what happens is when crisis happens, we cling to the bad qualities and we dump the good qualities, saying that no, no, at the moment we just have to think selfishly of ourselves. Yes, we have to think of ourselves, but we have to understand that ourselves are going to live in a post crisis world. And what is the society that we want to live in post crisis? We are not all going to die. Some of us will die. That happens. That is the collateral damage. But those of us who survive, what is the kind of world we want to survive with? It's not enough to clap for doctors or clap for the frontline workers in our society. We will always appreciate them because we know the kind of work they're doing. What is important is, do we emulate their services, their dedication? Do we do that, or we just clap and then say, I have done my good deed. Let me go back to my selfish self. The next time a doctor doesn't treat me right, I'll slap that doctor. That is not a lesson learned. That is succumbing to your adverse nature, the evil within us. As Gandhi said, evil and good resides within all of us, in our souls. We become what we allow to dominate in our situation. Whether we allow evil to dominate us or we allow good to dominate us. That is what matters. Let the good survive Corona, not the evil. I think that is what is most important for us to believe in and live by, because that is the only hope that we have in this kind of a situation. We see the kind of prejudiced statements that are coming out from the radicalized society, the kind of hate that is being promoted. In India, Muslims are being targeted as being irresponsible. The situation is being utilized to create prejudices in the post corona world. The virus will be killed by a vaccine or by a cure, but the virus of communalism is going to be something that threatens our society for much longer. So let us use this opportunity to find a cure for the virus of prejudices and communalism and hatred that we are so susceptible to. This situation gives us an opportunity to learn life in a better manner. Let's utilize that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gandhi, for this very inspirational talk, as we already expected it to be. Um, Now we have some questions, and I request all the listeners to write their questions in the chat box. We can take them one by one. But before we begin with the questions from the audience, I would like to ask a question myself, Mr. Gandhi,
Sure.
which is that generally it is believed that during times of crisis or pandemic, people are supposed to come together. People come together, they flock together, they show solidarity with each other. But unfortunately, during this crisis, we are seeing a lot of polarization, isolation happening, and people actually targeting each other in many countries, including India. Why do you think it is happening? And how do you think we can? Why do you think it is happening, and what is making it happen this time? Because usually that's the idea that people come together during time of crisis. But what factors are leading to the current situation?
As I said, Behzad, a crisis is something that is exploitable. It can be exploited by forces of goodness as well as forces of hatred. And what we are seeing rampantly today is the exploitation of this crisis by the forces of hate and prejudice that have been let loose. Yes, we have our own prejudices. All of us, we live with our prejudices. Some of us are able to suppress them. Some of us are not able to suppress them. And this is the time. In a crisis, you see the true character of people. And this is the time when we are watching that manifest itself in society in India. There is also a political strategy of hate that is being very insidiously instilled in the Indian society. And it's not been happening in recent times only, it has been happening for decades now. And that poison has seeped into a huge majority of people. Unfortunately, people like me, we have been complacent and we have not worked to reduce that poison from our society, and we are seeing the result of that poison in society at the present time of crisis, when these kind of qualities will be enhanced and seen. And that is what we are seeing, and it's not just isolated to India. We are seeing these kind of prejudicial attitudes happening everywhere. We are seeing responses to Chinese in the rest of the world. we're seeing the hatred against the Chinese as if the Chinese are not victims of this virus themselves. Why can't we think, why do we think that China is to be blamed for our plight at the moment? China is as much a victim of this crisis, but do we think about it that way? This is the difference, and this is where the forces of hate are victorious and seem to be victorious. But remember one thing, that finally humanity, goodness has survived, and that is where humanity has survived. It hate was the victor every time. Humanity would not have survived. Human race would not have survived. And so that is something that gives us hope. And I think that is something that we should work towards and work for, not only at the time of crisis, but if we haven't worked before, a crisis gives us an opportunity to start working. But that work needs to continue, because the forces of hatred, they work beyond the crisis also. They work all the time. It is us, we become complacent and say, okay, the crisis is over, we can go back to our lives and societies. No, the time is gone. We have to be constantly at work, constantly on vigil against the forces of hate, because the forces of hate are now rampant and belligerent, and we have to be equally rampant and belligerent, and that is what is required.
Thank you very much. Now we
Do I
have
have to get onto
a
the chat screen to see the questions, or what will happen?
oh, yes, or
Okay,
I
Anil.
can read them to you. Yeah.
I
Mhm.
started seeing the sidebar. Okay, let me see. You
Sure.
want me to take the questions from the beginning?
Yes. First, I can read them for you too.
Okay,
But
you
you
do
can
that
also
because
open
there are
up
too
the
many
questions.
of them. So I think you
Yes.
can read them, Bezad. It'll be
Yes.
easier for me.
I There are some comments too. There are some comments too, but I will only read out the questions for you. So the first question is individually we are all realizing the evil that we are facing now. How do we consolidate ourselves? Your grandfather made it a movement. How do we join together?
I think what needs to be done at this time is appreciate individual instances and initiatives. We wait for a organization or an institution to join. I think it is not required. At the moment, we need to just work individually or form a group of like-minded people and start working amongst each other. I think what is required is individual responsibility in these times, and not wait for a collective initiative to take place. So I think the most important thing in these times of adversity and threat is individual initiative, individual belief, belief in the ability to make a difference individually. That is, I think, the most important ideology to follow at the moment.
Thank you.
Bezat, can you
Now,
also read out who is asking that question, if that's possible?
sure, I will. Now, that question was just a minute. Was from Saifi Saraya.
Yeah.
Now we have a question from Ahmed Keskin from
Mhm.
Australia.
Okay.
Uh, the question is, how do we as individuals and civil society respond to politicians and try to politicize COVID-19? What can we do to diffuse political rhetoric that seeks to divide us and work towards social cohesion?
See, the thing
That's a
is,
question from
politicians,
Ahmed.
yeah, sorry.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, the thing is that we have allowed the political space to go unchallenged for too long. We have stopped interacting with politicians and telling them when they're wrong, when they're lying, and when they are being selfish. We have to get back into that space and be there vigilantly to tell these people, because politicians are a reflection of the selfishness of our society, of our individuals. They don't come from Mars, they come from within us. They discover our weaknesses and exploit them. So let's not think of them as somebody separate from us. They are part of us, and they're doing it because we have given them the ability, the freedom to do that. So let's stand up and call the lies of politicians publicly. Tell them that they are lying, and we will not accept those lies. We start doing that, they will start drawing back. They will start withdrawing. Because remember, a politician and a successful politician is one who exploits our weaknesses and exploits a crisis for their own selfish greed. And that is their survival formula. So we cannot blame them for that. They will always do that. They will always use a situation for getting personal benefits for themselves. So let us turn that against them and expose them for the lies that they spew, for the selfishness and the venom that we do. We cannot be non-aligned with politicians. Politics is a part of our way of life and society, and we will have to participate in that. I'm not saying participate in the sense that we all become politicians, but I'm saying participate in the sense that we take responsibility for the actions of the politicians and stop them when we can. Raise our voice of discontent. We don't become modest, we don't become polite. We become vociferous and tell them that they are not right and we will not accept it without challenge. That is what is required today.
Thank you. Now we have a question from Hasina Ahmedi. The question is, human beings have always been selfish. Is it really possible to change the humankind, the humanity?
I don't think we as collectively have only been selfish. Yes, we have been selfish. There is a virtue in being selfish too. It's not as if being selfish is all bad. Selfish is what has ensured that we survive for so long. And so it's not all bad. But when it goes beyond a certain extent, it becomes greed, then it becomes bad. And I don't think we are all universally selfish or greedy in that sense. We act greedily from time to time. If we were not, if there was no good within us, if there was no compassion within us, then we would not have understood qualities like compassion, service, and those kind of virtues that we come to appreciate today. So no, I don't believe that we are universally selfish people. I believe that there are selfish people and there are selfless people, and the selfless people are the one who become the legends and the inspirations in life. So let's look at, that's where I started my talk by saying that in this kind of a crisis, the only remedy of survival is to become positive and start looking for the goodness in each other, and not, there is a time and place for criticism. Just now there is a time to look positive, be positive, and look for the positive in everybody. So I don't agree with the fact that we are universally a selfish people. We are selfish and we are selfless. We have both qualities within us. Some of us are selfless, some of us are selfish.
Thank you. Now another question is from Manha. The question is, you just said danger of social isolation and danger of intolerance shown by administration towards such social isolation. My question is, who would get the benefit of such social isolation?
Divide and rule has been the hallmark of successful exploitative politics. We have always allowed the forces of evil to become victorious when we are divided. Divisions are what leads to isolation. And so it is very natural that the political class would benefit from the isolation. When we start building walls, then we stop the interaction with each other and the walls come closer and closer. We keep building walls till finally we say, find ourselves isolated from everybody else. And so that is something that will benefit those who exploit that kind of a situation. And so it is very natural that in these times when we are isolated from each other, the seed of hate, the seed of intolerance, the seed of prejudice will be sown in our minds, because we don't have the opportunity to share with anybody at this moment. We are isolated. We live with that. And if we start believing that that is the truth, then it is the success of the forces of evil and hate. And that is where they will become rampant. So we have to be alert. Even when we are isolated, we have to find ways of connecting with one another. We have to be together. We have to share one another's insecurities also.
Thank you. Now we have a question from Shafak from Papua New Guinea. The question is, can you explain, do you think the world will become more intolerable after the pandemic is over, and why?
There is a danger of us becoming more intolerant post this pandemic, because we have started looking with suspicion towards even people for whom we did not have suspicious attitudes before. We have started, the first thing we look for is, would he be a carrier? Would he be infected? Would she be somebody who spreads the thing? We are so readily believing the fact, the fallacy that this pandemic was purposely spread around the globe. We look because we think of everybody with suspicion. And that is where it is already successful in making us think in these kind of intolerant and in uninclusive manner, where we look at everybody else as adversaries, where we look at everybody else as a threat. Yes, for a time being, we have to save ourselves. But if that becomes a habit, then society will find it very difficult to survive. Mankind, humankind, which is we are, we are inseparably linked with each other. We cannot sever those links. But an attempt is being made, and we have to stop that attempt from being successful.
Thank you. Now we have a question from Mirza Suleiman Beg. He writes, is this pandemic leading the world towards a one world order?
I don't think so. I don't think this pandemic is leading this world towards a one world order. I think this pandemic is leading us towards more isolation, more walls being built, more insulation becoming habit of life. That is the danger to this to humanity that this pandemic forces, because this pandemic could become the reason for wars. We could actually go back to the belief of just wars. The world has always looked for justified warfare. This pandemic gives a justification for just that. And so I don't think this pandemic is going to bring about a one world order. We must work towards bringing about this kind of a one world order post this pandemic. But unless we all work towards it, it's not going to happen as an automatic fallout of this pandemic. No, this pandemic is going to isolate us, insulate us, and separate us further, unfortunately.
Now another question is from Nasif Khan. Uh, it is painful to see intellectuals falling prey to the propaganda about spreading hatred. How can we stop? What can we do to stop this false propaganda to be accepted by the intellectuals?
Unfortunately, we have sort of created this whole class of intellectuals. Who are intellectuals? The true intellectuals never advertise themselves to be intellectuals. These are the kind of people whose intellectual abilities have given them swollen headedness and egos. And ego is the first step of evil. And I don't believe people who can succumb to these kind of hateful propaganda cannot have intellectual capabilities. I don't believe that. And so let us not think of people and give them those kind of statuses which are unsustained. I think we must treat people on the way they behave with another, the way they behave with strangers. And that's where my great grandfather had said that the true goodness of a society is reflected from the way they treat the weakest of the weak component in that society, the most deprived element of that society, the way we behave with whom we consider to be our inferiors. We always suck up to those who we think about as being intellectuals, and then everything that they do we accept because we think that they're intellectuals and they have thought it out. They are the most dangerous people because they have given you a preconceived notion that they are better than us. But people can become better than us only by what they practice and not by what we think of them as being. So let's not give this halo of sainthood and intellectualism to people. Let's treat everybody on par on the way they respond to situations in life, and then think of them with those kind of evaluate their qualities with those parameters.
Now, we have a question from Lakshmi. She asks, every generation has to face moral and societal challenges, which can also be an invitation for each of us to go deeper within. How do we find the Gandhi within?
As I said in my talk, we have all of us, we have good and evil within us. And what we become is which part of us we allow to dominate our personality. And so I believe that there is a Gandhi and there is a Hitler within all of us. And we become either a Gandhi or a Hitler, depending on which side of our personality we allow to dominate. So let look, and that is where the first step for becoming better is the ability to honestly introspect, look within, and find faults with oneself. And not just find faults with oneself, but find faults and then remedy those faults, turn them into virtues, improve. And once we start on that journey, then the better side of us will become dominant, and then the Gandhi within us will become apparent to everyone. So just let's look at that. Let's look at our better side and work towards making that better side of us the dominant part of our personality.
Now we have a question from Khairun Nisa Aga from Kashmir. She thanks you for the talk and asks this question that this pandemic has been able to that has this pandemic been able to make our decision makers realize that militaristic approach is to be replaced by more collective and humanistic approach, but the words of war have still not disappeared. What is your comment on this?
Well, first, I must apologize to her because people like me, we have not been just in our dealing with the situation in Kashmir. It's just the post corona crisis that we've started thinking of humanity and all that. But a huge crisis has enveloped Kashmir, if not for a long time, at least in the past 6, 7 months. And we have not been as active, proactive in showing solidarity with the people of Kashmir as we should have been. And that is where we have become instrumental in creating a wedge. And yes, I believe that military solutions and militaristic solutions have never ever worked. They seem to be working for a time being, but they've never ever worked in the long term. In the long term, only humanitarian attitude works. But unfortunately, in India also, the poison, the venom against Kashmir has been so systematically ingrained into us that we have not been able to think of Kashmir in a compassionate manner, and the situation over there, the grimness of the situation, and the ongoing situation adding to the calamity of the corona epidemic is something that we never ever thought compassionately about. And so I individually believe that I, as a person, own an apology to my brothers and sisters in Kashmir, because we have let them down also, and to expect them to be able to forget our callousness is a bit too much to ask for. And yes, so I agree with you that the militaristic options have never ever worked, and they will not work in the future either.
Thank you. Now we have a question from Cynthia. The question is, collective efforts have more power and can bring more pressure on the governments. Many NGOs are involved in relief works. How do we get involved in advocacy at this time?
I think advocacy is something that also works individually, because making that thought public is very important. Not bothering about its consequences and where it leads to is something that we must cultivate within ourselves. And advocacy will work individually also. If you speak truly and honestly, people will appreciate that, and they will join the cause voluntarily in that manner. Bapu, when he came and took up the cause of the Indian freedom, he did not wait for the machinery of a great party to work for him. He started working with the individuals. He started talking to them in their own language. I think we must understand the power of the individual, especially in things like the power of thought. And that is where we must understand that a thought kept within our own intellect is a thought that decomposes very fast and has no utilization. But a thought shared is a thought that multiplies many a times over. And for that, for sharing a thought, we actually don't need an organization. We can do it individually. In today's time of information technology and social media, every individual thought makes a difference. Look at the kind of hatred that is being spawned in social media individually by people. It has a collective effect, but it is, if you look at the origins, they are all individuals promoting that hatred on their individual self, and the result is of the collective. So we should also not bother about finding organizations or groups or things. They will happen if we connect with like-minded people, and the connection will only happen if we voice what we honestly believe in, and we have the courage to talk the truth even in the face of adversity. So I think in advocacy, we have to take responsibility individually.
Thank you. Now we have a question from Sayyid Munawar. He asks, what was the definition of Hinduism by Mahatma Gandhi?
I think Bapu believed in the Hinduism of universal good, of tolerance, the Hinduism that was compassionate and accepted everybody, and the Hinduism that had the quality of surviving in adversity. Hinduism is the only religion that has thrived during the times of rule of a very, very belligerent other religion also, and survived, and, not succumbed to that period of time. And I think that is the quality of compassion that Hinduism came about. You see, we must understand Hinduism was a way of life. It was turned into a religion. It was never a religion, because if it had started as a religion, there would have been religious practices of becoming part of that religion and things. Hinduism is the only religion in which you can't join that religion through baptism or through any other ritual. You're born a Hindu, you live a Hindu, you die a Hindu. And that is because it is a way of life and not actually an organized religion. The corruption within Hinduism has occurred because it has been attempted to be made into an organized religion. And that is where all the evil has come in, because that is where intolerance and seclusion and isolationism came into Hinduism. And Bapu looked at the more compassionate, more humanitarian practice of life that was the Hindu lifestyle. And that was what he adopted and that was what he practiced. And that is the difference between Hindutva and Hinduism. There is a very big difference. They're not the same thing at all.
Thank you. Now we have a question from an anonymous person. It just says iPhone. So the question is, diseases don't have a social preference and pathogens don't distinguish victims by race, class, religion, gender, or other identities. However, history shows that each time there is a pandemic, deep-rooted social prejudice resurfaces, often with horrifying results. In our case, interestingly, we find even in this hard time a communal angle in this pandemic. Communal prejudice has found new viral spread, riding piggyback on the Tablighi Jamaat. Now, people associated with Tablighi Jamaat in particular and Muslims in general are being treated more as a virus than rather than as a human being. How do you see? Is there any pause or rest for this linguistic yellow thought process in the near future, or the scopes for solidarity out of it?
Well, I think adversity is the time when, as I said in the beginning, you can it will encourage either the goodness of a human being or the evil within us, and the evil manifests itself in our prejudices, which we don't even realize are within us till in the time of crisis that we start behaving in that kind of a prejudicial manner. But I think that there is a reason, there is a need of reform. For too long, liberal Islam has been subservient to radicalized Islam. And in the world has only seen radicalized Islam in practice. We have stopped looking at the liberal, compassionate Islam that is there in the Islamic world and humanity also. We have not been able to see the manifestation of that. In the Tablighi Jamaat, has come to symbolize that kind of intolerant, radicalized Islamic practice, which is impractical, which does not take into consideration the kind of situation we are in, which is so radicalized that only religious practices seem to be rampant, and it's not exclusive to Islam. We see that in the new form of Hinduism, we see it in the radicalized Christianity, we see it in Judaism also. The Zionism is an example of that, and that is a human trait that we see in our world today. That is, at sometimes it is also very attractive to be part of that, and that is where that this entire campaign of hate seems to becoming successful at the moment, because we have found an object to vent our emotions at the moment, and the object is the Tablighi Jamaat at the moment. The Tablighi Jamaat is very closely identified with Muslims. So the distinction between a section of Islam and Islam in general is very successfully obliterated. But Islamic practices are also to be blamed for this. There are so many liberal voices in Islam. There are so many compassionate voices of Islam. But what seems to be rampant and dominant and loud is the intolerant, radicalized Islamic voice. And Islam has to look inwards and decide what is going to be representative of it. Is it the radical Islam that is going to be with a representative of it, or is it the compassionate Islam, the true Islam, that will become the dominant section? So I think that it calls for compassion on the part of others, as well as it calls for reformation and a look inwards, an introspection within the religion itself also.
Um, Thank you, Mr. Gandhi. Now we have completed the stipulated time, though, but I would still like to take one more question, which is from Abdullah bin Muhammad. The question is, what message would you like to give to the Indian media on the current situation?
I think Indian media and media in general needs to reform. It needs to look inwards like we all need to look inwards. And it needs to be separated from its commercial greed. Media has succumbed to commercial greed and becoming a tool of power and pelf. Media needs to be cured of that, especially Indian media. Indian media is by and large a complete sold out medium. I think, although I don't like to use this comparison because it is a generalized prejudicial term, but in this particular case, I think Indian media needs to be cured of the habit of prostitution that it has succumbed to. It needs to become morally ethical and not be after the rewards that are being thrown at them. Indian media has lost its credibility. It's become more of an entertainment than a knowledge source. But media in general is behaving that way. We see that happening all over. We see media being used to promote political ideology, political opportunism, and hate the world over. And so that needs to change. And it can only change if we reject this kind of prostituted media.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gandhi, for joining us today.
It was a pleasure.
We have listeners, audience from Thailand, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Indonesia, Australia, US, and a lot more countries. So I also thank all the people who joined us from different countries who are
Thank
in
you very
different time
much.
zones.
Thank you very much, all of you, for being here on a Sunday morning. Some of you, it must be late night for you. Some of you must be midnight.
Mhm.
I'm highly obliged to you, and I hope it was worth your while. Thank you very much.
And I have a quick announcement for all the people who have joined us. We will have another speaker on the coming Sunday too at the same time, 11 a.m. India time. So I look forward to your participation in our coming lectures too. Uh, thank you very much all, and thank you, Mr. Gandhi, again for your inspirational talk, which
Thank
is
you. And let's
greatly
be
needed at this
positive.
time.
Let's be positive. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.